Most holy, loving, and mighty God, we come before you, Lord, and we pray that we may humble our hearts, that we may hear this blessing you have given us this morning. We also thank you for the time that we have to fellowship with each other, to draw closer to each other and to you. We pray this morning, Lord, that you accompany us on this Bible study and bless us with your presence, Lord. We thank you for all that you do and always providing, and help us to overcome this feeble mind that we have, that we may learn the lessons you have put forth. And we thank and praise the Lord God Almighty, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so we'll pick up where we left off. And we're understanding that, I don't think we're going to finish this today, by the way, but we're understanding that the mistake that was made, and I want to make this point clear because Elder Parminger makes it clear. He points out that it's people in the movement, not the movement, if that makes sense. That the mistake was made by people in the movement. Because in this history here, he gives a little explanation of people asking him, we can't judge, and you must have some kind of superpower because you can judge. So the movement has the correct understanding, but people in the movement are seeing the separation taking place here, and taking Matthew 13, the parable of Matthew 13, the parable of the tares, and applying it here to the separation. And we've learned that we can't apply Matthew 13 here. Why? Why can't we apply Matthew 13 there?
Like Phil says, it's the wrong dispensation.
The wrong dispensation, because when does the final separation take place?
At the close of probation, at the harvest, at the end of the world.
At the harvest at the end of the world. Correct. At the harvest at the end of the world. So in Matthew 13, we see that there are servants that are doing the testing. The servants see the wheat and the tares in this history here, and they go to the householder and say, hey, we can see there's wheat and tares in the field. Some of those don't belong, so they're not all wheat, and the tares don't belong. Should we go tear up the tares? And the householder tells them, no, wait until the end of the world in the harvest, and who will do the work? The reapers will do the work. So there's servants and there's reapers, and we're just now kind of to that point to discuss the servants and the reapers, that they each have a role to play. The servants are here seeing the difference in the wheat and the tares. They're observing, and the reapers also have a work to do, but the servants do their work in a different time, a different work in a different time, and the reapers do a different work in a different time. That is important for two reasons, because what I just said, they have a specific time to do and a specific work to do. And also that the servants and the reapers thus far are not the same people in the parable. You have servants who observe and you have reapers, and they're not, at least in the parable, they are not the same people. They might be, but they might not be. but we're looking at it as two different dispensations. They're referred to, you have the reference of servants observing, and you have the reference of reapers. Matthew 13 does tell us who the reapers are. What does the Matthew 13 tell us the reapers are? If anybody remembers.
Angels.
Angels, right. So we went to Desire of Ages, 333. We found the subject, or the theme, is the final separation. So I do have, and maybe I can pull it up on screen.
Elaine?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, one of my famous, I feel it's a dumb question, but I know there's no dumb questions.
That's right.
But are the angel reapers the messages, or are the angel reapers, as we know the angels to be, but that can't be because Jeff is not amongst, well, anyway, or us, will we be carrying, I don't know, dumb question, or
I don't think it's
wait.
I don't think it's a dumb question, but let us proceed through, because the answer is not directly given to us, but I believe it's one of those things that we can work out.
Okay, thank you.
Whether or not we work it out today or not, I don't know. But anyway, so we saw Desire of Ages, that the subject is the theme is the final separation. So if somebody would read that very bottom statement, I kind of just left it down there because I don't want to scroll up too much. So this, somebody wants to read this passage here.
Starting with it. Go ahead, Sam. Go ahead, Francisco.
Right there where it starts with the great final separation.
Yes.
The great final separation of the righteous and the wicked, he had pictured in a parable of the wheat and the tares and the fishing net.
And the fishing net. So what are we actually looking at today?
Wheat and the tares.
We're looking at the wheat and the tares. But according to the Desire of Ages, or inspiration is telling us that when Jesus spoke about the final separation, Jesus used two different parables to do it. So the period of the final separation, which we know is the end of the world, which is the harvest, the period of harvest, is also told in the fishing net. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And we're looking at the wheat and the tares. So we'll look at a little bit of this here now. The final separation, for more information, we would need to look at the fishing net. So looking at the tares, we see that the tares is Matthew 13:24-30. And the fishing net, and this took a little while for the class to work out, and we'll explain why as we go through it. The fishing net is Matthew 13:47-48. Did somebody want to read? Maybe Phil wants to read 47-48.
In Matthew 13:47, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind. 48, which when it was full, they drew to shore and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away.
So we can pause here for a minute, though the class didn't go through that. But what he does say is that there's, you can see that on there, that there's important truth in this parable. He also said that his understanding is the shorter the parable, the more focused and important the truth it has. And this is only 2 verses. And if somebody could explain this parable, we would get another layer of important truth. So we're not going to go through it extensively unless anybody has some good skills here in bringing it through. We'll stick to the tares somewhat. But what we are looking at is the kingdom of God, or sorry, the kingdom of heaven is like unto the householder. The kingdom of heaven, let me see, pull up the other one so I have them together side by side. Not for you, but I'll at least have it for to be able to read it. Because it's likening the kingdom of heaven when it comes to the end of the world to these two parables. So give me just a second while I go back to Matthew. So the tares, Matthew 13:24. The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. So you have the kingdom of heaven is like a man that sowed good seed in the field. We don't know what any of that is yet, but this field. And the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind. So two different ways to be going to the same point of the final separation, because we see that the theme is the final separation, and Desire of Ages gives us that theme and tells us that these two parables are used to talk about the final separation. Okay, so we'll go on from there. Does anybody have any comments before we go on from there?
I really like that you brought that out because I never grasped that before, the part where the shorter a parable, the more important of a truth is in it.
Yeah, that was Parmender's words. I'm not smart enough for that. But Parmender's words. Okay. Okay, so the fishing net will help to clarify or reinforce some of the things that we are missing in the subject of final separation. And it'll help to clarify things that have not been yet understood. And he tells us that it's not an easy parable. And he compares it with, if we were to think that it's an easy parable, those two short verses, if it's an easy parable, we should look at what we've done with Matthew 13. And as he puts it, the mess that we got ourselves into with Matthew 13, in Matthew 13, Jesus actually explains the parable, and we still got it wrong. The parable takes us to see that the servants the servants are observers, they're not reapers. And we've taken symbols and mixed them all up and put them in wrong places when we tried to take Matthew 13 on the big line where it pertains to and tried to fractalize it and mixed up those symbols. So what he does talk about is that, and maybe it's in the second study, but I'll point it out here now, when we're losing our focus here, and our focus is on the servants that are judging, we put that here, the servants that are judging, we lost our focus on the theme, which is separation. And he points out that what we should have been fighting over is who are the servants and who are the reapers. So what we do see is that the servants have a specific time and a specific work, and the reapers have a specific time and a specific work. And Susan, I think somewhere in lies in your question that you asked earlier, taking you back to Revelation 13, and I'm not completely there, but maybe we can explore it all together, but not today. But taking you back to Revelation 13, which sorry, I said 13, I meant 14. Taking you back to Revelation 14 as well, and looking at the work of the third angel. So maybe we'll go into that a little bit as we go along. Okay, so in the parable of the tares, we covered the verses of the parable. And what else did we mention? You have the verses that cover the parable, and then what? Kind of already mentioned it. Might have went out quick in a hurry. But you have the parable itself, and then what do you have? What does Jesus tend to do when Jesus gives a parable? What is done?
Explanation.
An explanation. So I don't know if anybody has their Bibles open, or does anybody know when it comes to the tares, where's the explanation? What verses are the explanation?
Would it be 49 and 50?
You're looking at the net. That's correct for the net. So
But it's also talking about casting them in the furnace, and that would be the tares.
what those verses are explaining what parable?
The parable of the weeds explained.
No, verse 49 and 50.
Oh,
What are verse 49 and 50 explaining? Because that's what we're getting to, is the explanation. You have a parable and then you have an explanation. Where is the explanation for the parable of the tares? And what Francisco gave us was the explanation for the parable of the net.
The net, yeah. It was just, it kind of stood out because he's talking about furnace in there. And when he's talking about the net, he's talking about casting them out or just throwing them back in the ocean, I guess, is what I'm assuming.
So who's found the explanation for the parable of the tares?
I missed your question.
Oh, has anybody found the explanation for the parable of the tares? What verses? If you have your Bibles open.
I believe it's verse 38.
Verse 30.
Says the field is the world, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one.
You said 38. Read verse 37.
37 says, he answered and said unto them, he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. And
So
then
that actually marks the beginning of the explanation. And you went to, I believe, 38.
yes.
And I think Carol mentioned 40. Somebody read.
No, I did not. I mentioned 30.
Oh, 30, okay. Yeah, not 30. 30 is part of the parable itself. 37 to 42. That becomes a question in the classroom. And I went back and looked at it, and I kind of questioned that 43 doesn't belong there as well. But so we'll go with what the classroom says for now, and just for time. But 37 to 42 are the explanations. So you have the parable itself, and then you have the explanation. You have the fishing net, which is 47 to 48, the parable, and then the explanation, 49 to 50, which Francisco gave us. Okay. So the shakings in the movement we can see now, I think, I hope we all can. We can see that the shakings in the movement cannot be explained by Matthew 13. Does everybody understand that?
Yes.
Is there anybody that doesn't understand that? As Susan said, there's no dumb questions. Questions lead to answers. So the parable of Matthew 13, the separation, let's see, the separation in the movement cannot be explained by Matthew 13. And two things that were brought up, and these were part of the class discussion that I didn't include all the discussion in there, but in understanding this point 6, that was pointed out when we went through this when we did, I think it was class 14 and 16. I don't remember the numbers, but I think it was 14 and 16, where we went through and showed how, if I can say this right, for you, hopefully you remember it, how you can't go directly from Matthew 13 to us, that you have to sometimes take an extra step. Does anybody remember that? What we worked out with that? Kind of sounds like
It's like that Z method. You go from one to another and bring it down to the next to come up with a.
Sometimes you've had to take an extra step to get to us. And what was explained in those classes, and you can go back to the Portugal classes, I believe there were 14 and 16, where he goes through it, how you go from from Matthew 13 to Revelation 14. Revelation 14 is going to give us the three angels' messages, right? But we're looking at one angel in particular. Which one?
Third.
The third. So you go from Matthew 13, instead of going from Matthew 13 to us and making us priests, making all this about priests, you go from Matthew 13 to Revelation 14. Revelation 14 is going to give you particularly the third angel and the work of the third angel. We'll kind of leave that part of there. And then the other comment that was made, which we've already discussed, is the fractals, that you cannot take Matthew 13 and fractalize it and make it fit here. Matthew 13 is specifically talking about this dispensation. The theme is this dispensation, the final separation. The theme isn't even harvest. The theme is the final separation. Because if you had no tares, you would just be doing what?
There will be no separation. Just be gathering. Just be gathering.
You just be taking the wheat, right? Okay. So he goes on to point out, and I think that we already kind of have this part, that when looking at a fractal, an important principle, according to his understanding, is a law that has a certain property. And I think that property that the law has to turn into a principle is that it doesn't change. So a law that has a certain property, and that the law is that the principle doesn't change. So when you want to take something from a big line and fractalize it, you have to follow the principle. So you have to start any story that you're doing, any parable that you're looking at, you have to start on the biggest line. You always start at the highest level, the biggest line, and then take that to see if you can fractalize it. So when you go to Matthew 13 and you're able to see that the theme, using Desire of Ages as well, 333, and you see that, and when Jesus is talking about the reapers, the harvest, the end of the world, we know where we're at. And so when you look at it on the biggest level of where things are at, then you come down here and you realize that this separation here cannot be explained by Matthew 13. Did that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Elaine, would you mind stating that statement about principle not changing again?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to read it as it says it so we can try to process through.
Okay.
This was actually a quote. I took it out as a quote just to try to do it this way. Elder Parmenter, he says, I want to suggest in looking at the fractal, an important principle. So looking at the fractal, an important principle, according to his understanding, is law that has a certain property. And I think that certain property that law has to turn it into a principle is that it doesn't change. So that certain property that law has to turn it into a principle is that it doesn't change. So
yeah, that's deep when you really think about that, because we're to operate on principles.
Correct.
Right? And I hope I'm not digressing. I'm not trying to, but Elder Parmenter a few weeks back challenged us in the Bible study to consider that the conservatives, the different groups, like when we were discussing the Supreme Court rulings, and he was trying to get us to think that they might be operating on principle, like we're operating on principle. However, I still can't see that they're operating on principle, because they're always changing things to fit whatever their agenda is, if you follow what I'm saying. And that's why I wanted you to repeat that, because to me, a principle is something that is firm and substantial, and it girds everything, and it isn't soft, where you can play with it and mold it and shape it according to your will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes me think of the Supreme Court, for instance, and that article that we studied quite a while back on originalism, I think it was the one on the ISL theory, but it was talking about originalism and how showing how the justices will use, am I using the right word, originalism? That's the right word, right?
Yes.
That they will use originalism when it suits them, which would be their principle. Be consistent. If you're going to use originalism, even though we know it's wrong, but they're not even consistent in their own principle.
Yes, that's why I still wonder what he means that we should consider they're operating on principle, because I see them as unprincipled.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah. Anyhow, I don't mean to digress. The study's excellent. And just that thought occurred to me when you were reading that definition.
Yeah. How I understood that, and this is without really fully remembering that discussion, but if you look at the two streams of information, one stream is on conspiracy theories and one stream is on truth, and they follow the principles of their own perception is made up of conspiracy theories. So their whole perception is askewed on things. And in that sense, I think they operate on those principles. But you take it down to the details, like with the Supreme Court. And I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I get what you were saying now. That because when you take it on the level of Supreme Court and use them as an example, they're going to use what suits them, just as you were saying, when it does suit them and when it doesn't. But they're still working on, I think what we have to understand, if I'm understanding this correctly, is there's a higher principle that they're operating on besides that. Does that make sense?
I appreciate your, explaining it, how you're seeing it. And I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm still struggling with it as a whole.
That was my poor attempt.
No, not your attempt, just the whole question.
But they have a completely different set of principles to begin with. And
I guess, but I don't call those principles, I guess. Maybe that's the difference. I see, and I notice Christine has her hand up. Maybe she has something to add to it.
Go ahead, Christine.
I think you're both right, but there's a bigger picture. It's like they have their principles of the way they see God and the way they want to change government and the world to fit their way of thinking, and that's their overall agenda, their principle. But they will use any means underlining to achieve that. And so their methods of lying and twisting and going saying it one way and then saying it the opposite way are just their method, their means of getting to their overall principle of changing, like in that article we read the other day where about the front porch and the men who were so they were in that small town, and the two gay partners had the restaurant of the front porch. And then the two people that moved in next door, these conservatives, 20 years younger than them, they came in saying, okay, we're not we're not trying to change things, but obviously they were, because they were running for office, they were making waves, they were doing their best in every way to undermine the business of Front Porch, to put them out of business. They said one thing, they did another, but their overall principle was to change the way the city, the government operated to fit their perception of what they thought God wants, an overall white male patriarchal agenda.
I appreciate the clarity, Christine. I think my problem lied in the word principle. I see it as a moral, the way that Elaine read the definition. That is how I see principle, but I'm getting it. It's making sense what you're both saying. They have their principles. They're not like our principles.
Right.
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 If I might add, sometimes to certain words, we put a positive nuance to those words. Like when we say, principle, or words like discipline, we give it a positive nuance to those kind of words, because we believe in those being disciplined and being principled. But if you just put a neutral without positive or negative and just go with the meaning, then principle is just something, it's a basis on how you operate. And so both, without giving neither negative nor positive nuance, it's just the basis of how one operates. It's the ethos of how one operates. So one operates under a parable methodology, and the other operates on conspiracy theories. So in order to fulfill a conspiracy theory, because it's false to begin with, you have to lie, you have to cheat, and you have to make up stuff to fulfill that methodology of conspiracy theories, because like I said, it's false to begin with. So I think if we just put it in a neutral context and not give a positive nuance to it, like principle, if we give a positive spin, then they don't have a principle. But if it's neutral and just say that it's an ethos that they operate under, then we can see that it is contrary to ours, conspiracy theory versus our parable methodology, if that helps.
I was
That
gonna,
was extremely beneficial. Thank you, Phil.
and I was gonna say, and you said a lot of it, if you were to take it to the highest level of the great controversy, what is the principle of the two sides?
Good versus evil, love and hate.
That's what I was thinking. So everything underneath is going to be guided by that principle. And you took it to ethos. That's where I was headed as well. Ethos that we see in the movement, we see freedom versus equality, but that we also see, this is how I picture it in my head. I don't want to say something that's wrong, but the side of freedom wants the freedom to hate and the freedom to discriminate. So taking you to hate. And the side of equality is about love. So if you took it to the highest level, I think you would say love and hate. And so they operate off of that principle, that principle, the things that, the details that get, and the little, not little, but the circumstances that all happen beneath are still guided by that principle, either love or hate. Does that make sense? So thank you for all the input. Phil taking us to the to the ethos. Okay, so this is where it gets a little tricky, because there are some things that I was like hesitant to bring in to this, because he's making a point and I'm not sure. I think I've got the point, but I don't know how to relay the point. So we'll read a little of this. We're talking about why you don't fractalize these stories. So I'll read it and then maybe we can discuss it. So one of the reasons we fractalize is because our history is lasting so long. The Elder Tess will talk about events in such a strong way. Some event that happens, she makes it like a big headline to us, and we're led to think that this is really a super significant event. And I think the point that he's trying to make is we're taking events that happen here and then wanting to take them to here. But we know that we have to start here and then go here. And with that mindset, you can easily begin to think that all of these things that you're reading must refer to this particular event. Whatever we were reading is going to refer. So we are supposed to highlight what's going on today, because if we don't see the importance of it, we'll just stay asleep. So we need to see the big events that we've watched all along, and we looked at November 9. We need to see these things. Otherwise, we would just remain asleep. And he says that this methodology of bringing the small and making it significant or big is absolutely necessary to deliver the message correctly. The problem is it can bring you to a false sense of security or wrong understanding. We can begin to think that all of these stories are just about us, which is the point we're trying to sort out. Who is us? We can start to think that we can begin to think that all of these stories are just about us. When we think that it's all about us, we forget, when he says us, we forget that this doesn't involve just us. Us as in humans, it involves. But us as in priests, that's not all that's involved. This line represents the line of 144,000. What is the other word that we use to describe this line?
The world.
The world, right? The world. So we can begin to think that all of these stories just talk about us, the priests, us, you and me. And he says that Elder Tess and Parminder himself and Elder Jeff, all of them do exactly the same thing. They take an historical event that's occurring now and make it so significant, so important that it eclipses everything else, even the things that are going to happen in the future. So if you're not careful, you'll fall into the trap that FFA had fallen into, because it's one thing to do what Elder Tess does and take this significant event and make it so big. And it's another thing what FFA did, because you can turn an event into something important like November 9, or FFA, you can actually get a future event and then you move it. Because November 9 is so significant, you actually say it equals a future event. And it becomes dangerous because you will come to the wrong conclusions. So I don't know if anybody didn't follow that, let me know and we'll try to break it down a little bit better. But my main understanding of it initially is that you take an event off this fractal line, because it is the fractal. It is a big event, it's significant, and we need to understand it and how it pertains to us, but you can't take that event and project it to the big line. The big line must be understood first before you can then take the events of the big line and see where they belong here. Any questions on that?
I'm wondering if we could say that the big line is our concrete model, so to speak, and that, the fractal is the abstract from the big model. Because like spiritual and literal, first you have to understand the literal, which is concrete, which, keeps a form, is true to that form. And then you can begin to understand the abstract or the spiritual, which has different nuances to it, right? Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, Mary asked, because we're going to touch on this just a little, what is the purpose of fractals? I thought they give us a glimpse of what is taking place or to take place on the bigger line in a similar dispensation. So we can expect separation in latter rain on the 144,000 line as there was in 2019 on the priest line. Where am I wrong? Okay, so we're going to try to cover that. Because there is separation. We know there's separation all along the way. People fall off the path all along the way. At some point, they have similar characteristics. And Sarah's kind of touching on, and I am not the expert here, kind of touching on a little bit of what I was thinking, because Elder Tess did presentations on fractals to help us to understand the different types of fractals. But even with a fractal, what did they, maybe somebody remembers, the same self?
Well, there was self-similar fractals, and then what was the other one?
Self-same?
Self-same and self-similar. So that's what I meant when I was saying nuanced, where the original fractal is all one whole, right? It's got every component in it, let's say. But then a fractal is a part of that whole, and it can either be identical
or similar,
or it can be similar, and similar means there's nuances to it. So if you take the nuanced line, that's why you can't use the nuanced line and bring it up to the other one. You have to go the opposite direction. You have to go from the original to the fractal.
To here.
Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
If I'm understanding.
I hope that helps Mary, because in order to fractalize, when you do fractalize something, or when you do look at fractals, and you can Google fractals and you'll see a lot of images, and you'll see that they will have their, as Susan put it, nuances or differences. So if you look at the fractal line first, you're not going to know what the original fractal looks like or what it consists of. And you're liable to try to take your fractalized version to here. And our fractalized version in this case is that this is the separation. So if we're taking in our minds, we're taking our fractal version of Matthew 13 and putting it up here, then we're going to put this as the final separation. And we're going to come to wrong conclusions. So you take a story or a parable, and you always start by putting it on the big line first. Then you can take that story and you know where things fit so that you put them in their proper place, if it is something that can be fractalized. Did that help, Mary?
I'm following.
Was that Mary? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's see here. Understanding the big line explains what happens in the fractal. Yes, yes. But you can't take what happens in the fractal and explain the big line. You'll make mistakes. Okay, so and that's what he says. He goes on to say that that's why the issue of fractals is so important. Always look at the big line first and don't automatically go to the smallest or the fractal. So, and then he makes the point again about going from Matthew 13 to Revelation 14. If you want to understand who the us is, you need to go to Revelation 14. And Revelation 14 in particular is going to talk, it talks about three angels, but we're looking at our focus as the third angel. And you can then begin to put pieces in place between Matthew 13 and Revelation 14 and the third angel and get pieces in their right proper order, and then also understand fractals as being progression and repeat and enlarge. You have to have this big line before you do anything. You have to put the stories or parables on a big line first. So he goes on to say that we went to Revelation 14, where it speaks about separation. And then Matthew 13 also speaks about separation. And in some strange way, you can find them. And what ends up happening is you look at the separation in the movement here, which is what was done. Lost my place, hang on 1 second. You end up looking at the separation in the movement, and you say that what we see here is what Matthew 13 is speaking about. So we looked at the Matthew 13, we looked at the fractal, and we looked at the fractal to try to explain Matthew 13. So what people in the movement said is that the separation, that's occurring, is an explanation of the separation in Matthew 13. And that was the mistake that was made. We made the mistake because we said us. The key word here, us. We said us. When we say us, we're going to assume us means priest. We took separation here, us, priest, and applied Matthew 13 to here, and we made a mistake. So let's see, we made the mistake because when we said us, we made it priests and not humans. So why? This is another side discussion that was going on in the class too. So hopefully this comes out helpful as well. I don't know if anybody else, do you have any comments on that part that we just covered? Yes, so the conclusion of Matthew 13 cannot be, the conclusion is, yes, Matthew 13 cannot be fractalized. You cannot fractalize Matthew 13 to here. Because the us is, what we're understanding is the us, hopefully we're all understanding, is the us. And when you take Matthew 13 and you see servants, wheat, and tares, and you say us, we're saying priests. But Matthew 13 is the end of the world, and we're talking about humans, not priests. Not to say that servants are not priests and wheat are not priests, but we're taking all of this and calling the tares priests, and that does not reflect Matthew 13. Okay, so this begins the next discussion that then carries over more into when we get down to this, but I don't know how far we'll get into this. So I'm just gonna, again, this part I'll just read and we'll discuss it because he's making a point that that hopefully we all get. So he asked the question, say it's 10 years ago, why did we need to know how long the Sunday law is? Why do we need to know how long the Sunday law is?
So we're prepared?
Say that again.
To be prepared?
To be prepared specifically? What?
To observe.
Say that again.
To observe.
Put ourselves in our old Adventist brains. Not what we know today, but in our old Adventist brains. Why did we need to want to know how long the Sunday law was? To prepare is correct. What were we as Adventists trying to do?
Know our purpose. Go ahead. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I think we were waiting for the Sunday law to have our hearts changed at that point.
That's true too. Not the point that I'm trying to, that he's bringing out. What in particular? Go ahead.
I'll make an attempt, but I don't know if it's right either, what you're looking for. I was thinking it's because that it was used as a marking point, and they didn't have any of the waymarks we have acquired through studying the lines. That's their only waymark, and it's in the past, the real Sunday law anyway, so that they don't have a compass at all, but they were using that as their event that they're watching for, and they're missing all the other events that are actually occurring. That was what I was thinking.
So between you and what David said, kind of, I believe, heading where we're headed. But in particular, as an Adventist, what was our focus on when Sunday law comes? What do we need to be able to do? And somebody said to flee, somebody said to run to the mountains, but and that's part of what we thought as well, which is wrong. But there was something specific that we were. Ellen White talks about it.
The loud cry?
No, and not about talking about preparing the world. No, those are all things that we thought, but just not the one that I'm looking for. So if we're asking about, when is the Sunday law? Why do I want to know? Why do I want to know? And Christine got us on the right place. And Anna says it too, to prepare. But what was our mindset that we were needing to prepare?
Is it basically to say that we're nearly there at the end?
Say that again?
That we're nearly there at the end?
Yeah, I think maybe we've been in this movement. Maybe we're coming along established and we're forgetting our old Adventist thinking. And I don't know how to ask the question. Well, I'll put this part out there. You're going to come into a time when we can't buy and sell. What do we need to prepare for? The Sunday law, you can't buy or sell.
The mark of the beast.
No. You can't buy or sell. So what do you need to do to prepare?
Oh, you mean like have your place in the country and be set up and garden and all that ready?
Exactly. So our mindset, how many of us, I know I went through my periods of it, thought, well, I'll stock up as many lentils as beans and things like that I can. Every time I go to the grocery store, pick up a little double this, double that, because you got to be prepared for that day that comes that no one can buy or sell, right? So we'll try to walk through this with that part in mind. Anybody else go through that experience? The country living, got to grow our own food, stock up the beans.
Yes.
Yeah. I know I did. What little piece I could do. And even here trying to grow a garden, it's like, well, how long am I going to live off a garden in my backyard? Especially if no one can buy or sell and people know I have a garden in my backyard.
And where I live, between the squirrels and the deer and all the critters, oh my goodness.
So isn't it kind of a joke to try to prepare to stay? Okay, so why would we need to know how long the Sunday law is? Because, wow, I got to do all this preparation. I've got to store up food to last. So, okay, with that mindset, we want to know how much food to store. We want to know how long it is because we want to make proper preparation. The problem with all that is when we got to 2014, how long was the Sunday law? We'll get to 2014, and that's the Sunday law, right? How long was the Sunday law? Yes, homegrown food does taste good.
Was it till 2019?
It's till 2019, right? Yes. So this was the Sunday law, period, and it's 5 years. Okay. So the point is made here to go on about, and David put in there, and I know somebody else said it, and I can't remember, I think it was Christine, I can't remember, but heading towards the right direction of where we want to go. About the discussion that went on about trying to prepare and have enough food stored to survive for 5 years. And he goes on with this discussion of who can do that. He talks about the Mormons being the ones that are very big and the best at, I didn't know this, but the best at food storage, and even they can't store. So imagine you have a family of 3, 4, 5 people, and you're trying to put away food to last you 5 years. And then what you also have to deal with, okay, it's no buy and sell. So what's going to happen is people know where you're at. You know, you invite your friends over, and he talks about them where they had people come over and sometimes do schools. So church members would come over there and they're going to know what you grow. And those friends today might not be friends tomorrow. Okay. Then you also have the issue of guns in America. Kind of switching it to take it a little bit different here. You have the issue of the guns. And in the Sunday law period, you have this mindset that I have to take care of myself. I'm fearful. And that's what they're fearful of. That's why they all need this Second Amendment in their guns, which allows them to protect themselves against anyone that would try to take what is rightfully theirs. So we used to have conversations 10 years ago about how do we store enough food? How long should we store it? Which means the quantity. Where can we hide the food? Because you don't want to tell anybody, and I just covered that point. So these are all thoughts of don't trust anyone, hide your food as much as you can, have your guns to protect your food and such. Go out and buy 6 months worth, a year's worth, if you find beans on sale, etc., so that you can put away. And what Elder Parmenter says is, if you had told me 5 years after 2011, I would have just given up. If you're asking the question, how long, and it's 2011, you're going to tell me it's 5 years, and I'm going to have to, I'm just going to give up, because no one can prepare food to store and save for 5 years. He says it's impossible, and you would die unless you were really skillful. And he talks about he's using the, as if he'd asked Elder Jeff this question, and some obscure spirit of prophecy quote that says you might be able to do it for a year. Might give you a little hope if you think you can do it for a little year. So what for a year? So we would want to know we wanted to know how long the Sunday law would be, because we wanted to know how much food we needed to store and put away. If I miss any comments that need to be need to be read out loud, please stop there with their Sarah says, because I'm trying to watch them somewhat. It is sad to see how the history of ancient Israel is repeating, and you would think God's people have progressed to know the times, but sadly they are blind and are walking to their own destruction, to the destruction. Yes, they are completely of that different principle, as we were talking about principle. See, so it does touch on the point about how guns are not even cheap, and they're storing up readily many guns, and how expensive they are to buy. But also, where did we get the idea that we have to store up food and live in the country? Where did that all come from?
Egypt.
Hey, Egypt, okay. Yes. Where else did we get it?
Ellen White.
Ellen White. Yeah, and Mary put it too. Ellen White told us, right? And I'm just going to read his comments. There are a couple things that I want to make sure that we hear clearly. So we got it from Ellen White, and Elder Parmenter says, if it was me, I would say get a reasonable property with a reasonable job and just trust in God. And there was a big discussion that went on about that. And it was Ellen White that told us to make these preparations. She's the one that encouraged us to provide for our own food. And this is the part that I would want to discuss, just to make sure I understood it correctly. I think Ellen White says in this history, and I think he was talking about this history, that God won't provide for your food because the wilderness, this history, God won't provide for your food. I might have this backwards, so I'm going to read it and then we'll discuss it. I think Ellen White says in this history that God won't provide for your food because the wilderness time period she puts in Jacob's time of trouble. The wilderness she puts in Jacob's time of trouble. And in this time here, God will provide for our food. In the time of trouble, God will provide for your food, but in the time before it, we're supposed to take care of ourselves. Everybody, that part I do understand. So in this time, God will provide our food. And in this time, God will not provide our food. And this is the time period where we look at no one can buy or sell. So we thought we have to store up all our food here. And what he says is, if it were me, I would say get a reasonable property with a reasonable job and trust God. in this history. And I take that and we look at what is happening today. And I would think we have a completely different understanding of what the no buy, no sell looks like from what we would have imagined from what we learned as early on as Adventists or throughout our life as Adventists of what this period is, that we've got to stock up all this food because we can't buy, no one can buy or sell in this history. We've got to stock up all this food, but we're looking at it and things like the restrictions that are placed on the LGBTQ community. Look at the 303 Creative, the Lori Smith, who's not going to prepare a website for a gay couple. Is that not a form of not being able to buy or sell?
Yes, it is.
Right?
But yes, but I want to say, just there's that quote. I can't remember who did it. Help me if I can give a couple of lines and someone knows what I'm talking about. First, they came for the so-and-so, and I did not speak up. And then they came for the, I don't remember the whole quote, but you get the idea. And so a lot of people think, well, I'm not going to need an abortion, so I don't care about that law. Or I'm not LGBTQ, so I don't care about that law. But eventually it's going to affect everybody because that's how this operates. So what I'm trying to say is we can see that in 303 Creative, it clearly has already discriminated against a group of people not to be able to participate, right? Buy or sell. But if that principle is true, and it is the way this operates, it's such a scam. They try and make people think, these authoritarian fascists try and make people think that they're going to be protected and taken care of. But when all is said and done, nobody is safe. They don't realize, right? So everybody is going to be affected eventually.
Yeah, and I still have questions myself with quite a few stories in the Bible where God's people do observe the war and they're untouched. If that made sense. So whether or not that is only here and what we're going to see here is different, but yes, we're seeing it already coming into fruition, the restrictions being placed on people. And for right now, they don't touch us. But what happened during the Fugitive Slave Act?
It eventually involves everybody.
It involved everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, isn't it still better? I mean, that's in our vow, to find a place in the country. I mean, I'm a late bloomer to finally getting a place in the country, but I guess it's okay from what you're saying that it's okay to remain in the city if you find a reasonable property and a job. However, it does seem like there's, more shootings, more of all that disturbance down in the cities.
Yeah, and well, his words were, if it was him, he would get a reasonable property with a reasonable job. What were many Adventists doing? When you use the word reasonable, get a reasonable property, what would you say many Adventists we saw doing?
It was not reasonable. It was more off grid, total isolation, self-sufficient.
Self-serving.
So yeah, self-sufficient, self-serving, isolation, grow your own food, get your own well, get your solar, get your own power source. So everything that you don't need to be hooked up to the grid. That was their idea. because we know people like that.
And there's, yeah, we do too. I do too. And then you can't, you really can't help anybody either. You can't be an influence to anybody when you're that isolated. You have no opportunity to be an influence to anybody when you live that isolated. So the last point that he makes in that, before that presentation ended, was going back to the Mormons. He just makes the point that where did the Mormons come from? Does anybody remember where the Mormons actually came from? He mentions Jehovah's Witness too. Where did they come from?
Out of this movement.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
So their ideas on food storage, and Jehovah's Witness, he said, were pretty good at it too, but none could do for 5 years, that their ideas came as well from this movement. So the roots of their ideas come from those movements back then.
So do you mean like they came from the Millerites and all that?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yes, and Joseph Smith, I think I have the right one. Joseph Smith. He actually tried to run for president during some of this history as well that we've looked at. Anyway, so yes, they came out of the Millerite movement and out of the Adventist movement. I don't remember exactly where they were on the timeline of that, but yes, they began in that movement. It always reminded me of, like, you know, Martin Luther that stands up, and he's got a part of the message for his time, but look how wrong they all were. But from Martin Luther, they were meant to continue to progress, but they do what we always do, is split off and branch off, and then you have Calvinism and all the other isms. You know what I'm saying? So the same thing happened. There's always these splitting up into different divisions and going a different direction. Okay, anybody else before we won't finish this one. It'll be next week when we finish it. So just start out with going back to the list that we just went through. The history is reviewing, began by reviewing the classes that have taken place. And in those classes were discussed that there is a great test. Ellen White talks about the great test, and that the test, whether or not it's prophetic or moral. And then they got into this discussion, and Matthew 13 came up. And in Matthew 13, they first, in looking at this history here, we're looking and seeing that there were servants that are testing and plants that are tested, and applied that to us meaning priests. And so we see that there are 2 plants being tested, not just one. And we applied priests to tares in doing that, in saying that this is us. And that was a mistake. And also we saw that the title is the tares. If you look in your Bible, and that generally is going to be what it's going to tell you. Some might use a different word for it. I think somebody said that there said the weeds. So, and then the theme was the final separation. And the theme is found in Desire of Ages 331. And we'll continue there. So then we saw that what they were seeing from this testing is that these servants are judging, and becomes a discussion rather than the theme being the focus. Then this focus became on the servants as being judges in the discussion and the argument, because you can't be judging people. But we lost focus on the theme by discussing the servants and whether or not they can judge. So then point 6 was just more detailed, trying to get into understanding 3 about this separation between the shakings that took place here, and finding that those shakings that take place here are not Matthew 13, because when you look at Matthew 13, you see that Matthew 13 is talking about the final separation where the reapers do this work, and the servants come out of Matthew 13 from what we're looking at. They come from Matthew 13. We see them observing here, but not to do anything, because the reapers are going to do a work of separation here. So we see that the servants have a time to work and the reapers have a time to work. And we already touched on this one. I think Paul answered it earlier, that if there were no tares, there would be no separation of the plants in the field. Because the theme is not about separating wheat from the field, which would be harvest. The subject of the parable is not harvest. The subject of the parable is final separation. Even though harvest is taking place, the theme is the final separation. Let both grow together till the harvest. It's the story of separating two types of plants, which has to occur in the time period of harvest. So it's not about harvesting wheat, it's about the final separation of the wheat and the tares, though harvesting is taking place here. So point 3 was who were the servants and who were the plants. The servants we saw, and the plants are us, but we didn't clarify what us meant. And so when you just say us, we might assume that us, all of this, is priests, and that was wrong. And then we looked at where we got the theme from, and the theme we saw from Desire of Ages. And we also saw that Desire of Ages talks about 2 parables. And which one did we find out that we haven't looked at that were missed?
The net.
The net. And we saw that both parables come in 2 parts. What are those 2 parts that they come in? Going to see how much we remember.
The story and then the explanation.
That's correct.
The parable and the explanation.
The parable and the explanation.
Parable and the explanation. Did anybody take notes and remember where in the tares, what's the parable and the verses, and what's the verses in the explanation?
In the tares, it's the verse 37 to 42.
Explanation. Does anybody remember the parable?
24 to 30.
24 to 30. Good. And the net?
47 to 48. And 49 and 50, the explanation.
Carol's showing us all up. I'm amazed at your memory. And I hope I can take care of myself to repair some damage that I have with memory. Good job. Okay, so we had the net was the parable is 47 to 48, and the explanation 49 to 50, and the tares, the parable is 24 to 30, and the explanation 37 to 42. Thank you for everybody that participated in that. So we saw it in point 5. Go ahead. Sorry.
Would you mind repeating that one more time where I could write it in the chat, get a visual?
Sure. Okay. Sure. Okay, the net.
Okay, the net. Matthew
13. They're both Matthew 13. The net is 47, 48. Explanation 49, 50.
Wait. So 40. The net is Matthew 13. What?
47 and 48.
47 and 48. Okay.
Explanation 49, 50. And the tares, you ready?
49, 50. Okay.
And the tares, parable is 24 to 30.
24 to 30.
And the explanation 37, 42. And if anybody wants to look up, we did 37, sorry.
That was 47 to 32?
37 to 42.
37 to 42.
I have that problem too. Memory problem, dyslexia.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm dyslexic, but I definitely twist things around backwards from time to time.
Okay, does that look right?
37 to 42. Yes. Yes. Great. Okay, so just to clarify, there was a discussion on there because in the previous, the one that we just finished, they start out by putting 43 on the board. And in this one, the discussion comes up and asking the questions, and they said 42, and they go back and forth with the question. And I just assumed based on the question and how the discussion went, oh, they must have had 43 by mistake. But one day last week, I was looking, and I'm pretty sure 43 actually belongs to it. So each one can check for themselves to see whether or not 43 does or does not belong. I think it was just closing it off, but it doesn't go into the next parable, if I remember right. Just to make it put it out there. So, okay, so we saw that we lost focus on the theme, and all the discussions centered around the servants. The focus shifted from the tares to the servants, because the title of the parable is the tares, and we put the focus from the tares and put it on the servants instead. The parable is supposed to be about the tares. And when we started teaching this and realized that we are the servants, then the obvious conclusion is we as servants can discern between wheat and tares, good and bad. And people said, we're judging and we're not allowed to judge. So the whole focus became about the ability of the servant to judge instead of the great separation. And if we just read the parable, what is wrong with that argument? What is the theme of the parable? We saw the theme is final separation. And this is where he points out again that if we were going to have a fight about the servants, what should our fight have actually been about? Who does the work of separation? Question for who does the work of separation? The reapers do the work of the separation. So if people were going to be fighting about something, what they should have been fighting about is who are the reapers. We should have been thinking about the reapers and not the servants if there was going to be a fight. So does it matter? Does it matter who knows who is good or bad? You're here in this history, you're a servant, you're observing. Does it matter who's good or bad?
Not at that point.
Right. What matters is who has the power to separate, which is the reapers. So we should have asked, are you a reaper? And that's why the argument is not a good argument, because the servants don't have any power anyways. The servants have no power to do anything. They see, they observe, but they have no power to do anything. So should they, the servants, be bothering the wheat? Should the servants then go and say, Christine's a servant, Susan's a wheat, I won't name name, so-and-so over here is a tare. Does Christine do anything about that?
No.
No. No. Okay, so most of this is just repeating what we've repeated several times already, so make sure. So the theme of the parable is separation. Okay, here we go. So the theme of the parable is separation, and what time period is the separation? We already said that, I believe. Still a repeat. Victoria, no, thank you. What time period is the separation?
Harvest.
Harvest. So the focus should have been on the reapers, not the servants. We pretty much covered all that. I think we've got, if anybody doesn't have that understanding of the fractal, because that's what a lot of what he continues on talking about, and I think based on our discussion, but not everybody talks, so it's hard to know. Based on our discussion, we know that where we got messed up was seeing a separation that occurred here and saying, hey, there's a separation in Matthew 13, so that's what's happening here. And that was a mistake. So we should have looked at Matthew 13 on the big line to see where the separation is, because seeing where the separation is would have showed us our mistake here. Another place where I think I brought this up before, not today, but maybe last week sometime. If anybody wants to better understand some of what we're discussing here, Brazil 2020, February 2020, and I put down number 7. I went through 1 through 7, and I don't remember if I got past number 7, but in number 7, he does begin to discuss something that we brought up a little earlier, where Ellen White discusses this history here, this separation here. Okay, so they focused on the separation in the movement, this separation here in the movement, and we saw certain characteristics, and you can go back to those messages, and I think we're going to touch a little bit on those as we get through the study, a little bit more on those characteristics. So he refers to 2 Spirit of Prophecy quotes. One of them, I'm pretty sure, is Early Writings 269, paragraph 1. And that was the chapter on the shaking, I believe. And the other one, I don't have the reference for, but
Elaine?
Yes.
Will you write those on the board?
Yeah, I don't have the other one, so.
When you take a picture of your board.
Yeah, let me go down here then. Early Writing.
Thank you.
269, paragraph 1. That's from memory, though. I'm pretty sure that was correct. It's the chapter on the shaking. And then the other one is the Great Controversy, but I don't have that reference. I don't have the reference. So, but we'll go through that as we get a couple of the points that were made as we progress through this. Okay, so we're going to go back to, we see the testing and tested. A lot of this is repeat, because I think we're doing okay on this. When we fractalize this, everything becomes priests, and that's what we were doing, was we were trying to fractalize Matthew 13, and it made everything priests, and that was wrong. You cannot fractalize this parable to the level of the movement. You cannot fractalize the parable of the tares in that matter, then neither than the net either, to the parable of the movement. When you do so, it makes all of this us, and that's incorrect. Okay, so now we're going to get to here. Participation from everybody. Let me get my pen. Participation for everybody. So Matthew 13. Who gives the parable of Matthew 13? And we're looking at 24 to 30. The parable of the tares. Who gives the?
Jesus does.
Jesus does. Correct. Okay. So let's go through the symbols. What are the symbols that Jesus gives us?
Householder?
Say that again.
The householder?
Yes, but we're not looking at that right now.
Like the sower.
So we're not looking at that either. Where?
We've got the field is the world.
The field, okay.
That's verse 38.
So we have the field, and then what's in the field?
Ground.
The seed. We have the good seed or the children of the kingdom of God.
So you have good seed.
And then the bad seed.
You have bad seed. The bad seed, and then
the enemy.
Not the enemy. When does it all?
When you have the harvest.
You have the harvest. I'm glad you're with me. Because there are so many other things we could pull out of there. So, okay, with that pattern, we're gonna continue that pattern down. So the good seed would be the wheat. Bad seed would be the tares, right? Yeah. And we see the field.
Is the world.
The world.
Well, in this case.
we're gonna look at it, we're gonna put it in the words that he put it in.
Okay.
What do the symbols represent? And you say the world, he did say world, but he had a reason for not wanting to use world. So what else would we call this world?
It would be the church.
Earth.
Earth, planet Earth. Take that answer. We have planet Earth. And
The earth fit is a better word for the agricultural model because you do everything on the earth, right? You
Right.
wouldn't say you're tilling on the world. You'd say you're tilling the earth. That's how I'm remembering it.
good way to think about it. So when you, what is the symbol represent of the good seed? Somebody said it earlier. I think it might have been Logina.
All the people of God.
People of God. Okay. And so what's the bad seed?
The children of Satan, or the children of the wicked one.
Okay. We're going to put people of Satan, but yeah, all of it. Okay. Okay. And the symbol of harvest.
Sickle.
Well, it would be the end of this planet if we're talking about planet Earth.
Perfect.
Verse 39, end of the world.
And we're going to, it is correct, that's what it says, but we're going to take earth or world and use earth. So we're going to keep it consistent. So you have the field is the world, yes, but in this sense, it's going to be the planet Earth. The good seed are the people of God. The bad seed are the people of Satan. And harvest would be then the end of the planet, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Ellen White says it differently. Does anybody know the reference where to find where Ellen White says it? I'm probably going to erase this before too long, so I may not get a picture with that there. You put it in.
Is it Desire of the Ages 333?
No.
No.
After you get the theme, final separation. Well, where do you get the where does Ellen White go through these symbols?
Where she talks about the harvest being the church, the field being the church.
Correct. Anybody remember the reference? Anybody remember the book? I bet you can remember the book.
I had one. I don't know if it is from this. COL 70.2.
Perfect.
Good job.
Perfect. Okay. So what does she say the field is?
The church.
Church. What do we think the church is? What does she mean when she says church? What are we thinking she means when she says church?
Church.
She says church. Doesn't she say church in the world? The Church of Christ in the world. Who's the Church of Christ in the world?
The SDAs.
SDA. And we're going to put it in parentheses. SDA. Okay. So who is the good seed? Let me pause there for a second to make sure we ask. I'm going to probably erase this here now. We want to talk about the church just for a minute. And we asked this question earlier, and I think we had it right. We came to the right understanding. How many churches are there?
One true church.
There's one true church. And where is the one true church? Where is the one church located? And who is it made up of? We went through this, if anybody remembers.
Church in heaven.
Those who are following.
You faded out, Regina.
Those who are following the correct methodology.
We're going to get there. Yep. We're going to get there. That's what we're working on. So you have one church, right?
Mm-hmm.
So God's people, I believe somebody said that, and we want to choose it, we want to change it, which we did earlier, to beings, not God's people. And so where is God's church located? And somebody said heaven, is that correct? I think somebody said heaven. So if you change it from God's people to beings, I think we came up with the right answer earlier. Heaven is not an incorrect answer, but something broader. Where is the church located?
The universe?
The universe. And what he basically said is the universe or everything else. Okay, so you've got heaven. You've got the universe. You got everything else. And so here, this is all God's church. You have the church on planet Earth, correct?
Yes.
I don't have this drawing in my diagram, so I hope I did it right. So throughout the universe, but we don't know how many planets this church is on. So we're going to take the church and locate it in two places, which we just did. We're going to take the universe and split it. And we see that this is the heaven or everything else. This would be, I have that wrong. Okay, good. The whole thing is the universe. The whole thing is the universe. Right. So you have heaven. Somebody else probably caught my mistake. Thank you. So we have heaven and everything else. All the other planets. And then this is the earth. This church is sinless. Everything else here is sinless. Well, maybe we could even say the 99 based on our discussion earlier. Maybe the 99 and the 1. That's not something they discussed, but I'm just looking at our discussion earlier. So it's everything else. And then the other side is earth. So this church here is sinless. And what's wrong with this one here?
It has sin.
It has sin. It has a lot of problems. And Ellen White will specifically tell us this story is about the church on earth. The church in the world, and we mean the church that's on this planet. And we put SDA. We just want to keep that in our mind. So this is the church that's on the planet. Then who are the good seed? We'll start filling out that now. Who are the good seed? And I'm not able to go back and forth too much if I gotta get down on my knees now to start writing. Faithful souls who have constituted the church. Souls who constitute the church, yeah. This will kind of be our discussion rather than their discussion, so throw out your answers. The good seed.
The people who are understanding the truth on gender equality.
What's under Ellen White?
We're talking about Ellen White.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So those who have been like baptized into the church, baptized into.
What might you call that when you're baptized into it?
Born again?
Born again. That's where the direction their class went. And we'll follow that if that's what we believe. So then what are these ones?
Following the false teachings?
Or error.
Error.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what would this be?
For Ellen White's time or for ours?
What does Ellen White say? Yeah. What does Ellen White? Well, yeah, from her. She says it's the church in the world. We kind of leave that one for now. Where they left it at this point, was end of the planet. And we'll work our way through that to see why. So some of the comments came up. What does it mean to be born again? What does Ellen White describe? She uses a particular phrase between those that follow error and those that don't. What are the ones that are following the truth? What are they following?
Present truth method.
Present truth, right? They're following present truth. Okay. And the present truth message to come out of her, right? To come out of her. What present truth message would that be? Come out of her. What present truth message is it to come out of her? If you look at it from Ellen White and the present truth message to come out of her, we're looking at bad people and good people. What do the bad people have to do?
They have to come out of the Laodicean condition into the...
They have to come out of Laodicea to join the good people, right? And to come over to here. Okay. So the good people would be people that follow present truth. What way do we call that today? How do we have present truth? What is present truth today? How did we arrive at present truth?
Via methodology.
Methodology. Oh, I know I spelled that wrong. Okay, so then what are they following?
Conspiracies.
Conspiracies, or
error
would be wrong methodology, right? So they would follow wrong methodology and conspiracy theories. So the good people have present truth, and then the group that doesn't have present truth. The present truth message is the message that goes to the church of Laodicea, right? Because she talks about that. The message goes to Laodicea. And you can find that in the Spirit of Prophecy in a number of places where she's, the message goes to the Laodiceans, right? So what is the special message that comes to the Laodicean church that some people accept and some people reject, that fixes you up and makes you become born again, or just leaves you a mess if you don't accept it? You need me to read that again? That was a long one. It's a special message to the Laodicean church that some people accept and some people reject. And we're talking about Ellen White. What are some thoughts? Okay, so Anna's got the direction that the class went, and so we're going to touch on that. Time setting. Ellen White, what did she say about time setting? We're going the right direction, just so you know, Anna, but what did Ellen White say about time setting?
No time setting.
No time setting, right? No time setting. So she says if you're going to accept the message on time, then you're in this group. Following error. Because remember, we kind of have a mixture in our minds. And what we're trying to organize is this group, and then we'll work on this one. And so we know time, but we know what she says about time. Okay, so, but we would be in error if we're following Ellen White, telling us there's no more time. Okay, so the third angel's message, we've talked about this a few times now. when we think about agriculture, what is the third angel's message? Agriculture. Not harvest. Third angel's message.
It's the early rain and the latter rain.
The early rain and the latter rain. And we do have that up here from our review. The third angel's message is the early rain, made up of two parts, the early rain and the latter rain. So it's made up of two parts, and something that we've already kind of, we'll see if we work through that there. Okay, so rain, it's rain, and what is rain?
The message.
It's a message. And that rain, that message is going to fix us or not, right? Which is the third angel's message. It comes in 1844. So I have this over here. If my pen will cooperate. Third angel's message comes in 1844. Why do we put 1844?
Wasn't that when it arrived?
Correct. Correct. So third angel, you see arrives, and you have former rain, and then you have latter rain, which prepares the crop for harvest. Okay. Why could we say 1850 for the third angel? Couple of reasons I'm looking for. Think about what Susan said.
Are you talking about the charts?
Not necessarily talking about the charts, but yes, it is there. It is on the chart. 1850 is not. We have the 1850 chart. I mean, so why? We could say 1850, and why can we say 1850? What did they?
Well, that was a Fugitive Slave Act.
That was the Fugitive Slave Act, correct? And where did the Fugitive Slave Act? Where was that on the Millerite or on the on their line?
Sunday law.
Sunday law, right?
Sunday law.
Well,
Yes. Sunday law.
50. So we see that the latter rain, the third angel comes in two parts, the early rain and the latter rain. As Susan said, it arrives, the third angel arrives here, which we marked as 1844. We also marked the empowering of the first angel here, the arrival of the second, the arrival of the third. We also marked 1840. And I need to go back and review because I knew I understood this before, and I've been forgetting this, how to sort that out. But right now our focus is on 1844 because you put both dates here. If anybody remembers that, because I don't, and I know we made the point, and I was like, oh, it was crystal clear, but wherever crystal clear is inside my brain is not firing where it is crystal clear. But I know we came across that in our study. But we're looking at 1844, the arrival of the third angel, and this is under the early rain period. And then 1850 is the latter rain, which represents what else? Latter rain, the Sunday law history.
Loud cry.
The loud cry, thank you. Yeah, the loud cry. The loud cry of the third angel. So you have the third angel arrive, and then you have the loud cry of the third angel. Okay, so another reason we can say 1850, because the call is to come out of, she gives the call there's a message that calls the Laodicean to come into the church. What special message that comes to the Laodicean church that some people accept and some people reject It's actually the third angel's message that comes, and it comes in two parts. And it's the early rain and the latter rain. But we can say 1850 because it is also the message to the Laodiceans. Does that make sense? The message that goes to the Laodiceans. And this is looking at Ellen White's, we're looking at Ellen White's line. And not everything here might be exactly right. We're just going to walk through it though. Okay, so
Wait, can you say that again? So are you saying that it can be both 1844 and 1850? Or are you saying that it cannot be?
the third
Okay.
angel can be, is, the third
Okay.
angel is. You understand
Okay.
why, right?
Yeah,
So
from
there's
what
two
you
parts.
just. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's two parts. Part one is the early rain, 1844. Part two is the latter rain, 1850. Or Sunday law. Okay, so, and that's a message that either fixes people or it doesn't. So line upon line, what does line upon line or repeating history do for us?
Doesn't it give us the time
Gives us
when
the
things
time.
march on?
Gives us the time. So we'll see how we can walk through this because you got us there quickly. When you have back in this history here, Adventism all the way back through, back through 1888, back through Adventist history, Millerites, or not the Millerites, but going into Adventism. What is the message that everybody is giving? What is the third angel's message that everybody's giving? Because everybody's giving this message. You're back here. What is the message? What do we? I don't think how to ask that question.
Message the Adventist is giving?
Yes. What do we all believe the third angel is? What do we all believe? We got to go tell the world.
Sunday law. Sunday law.
Sunday law. So we're talking about Sabbath. What else are we talking about? Who's involved with the Sunday law? That take away our knowledge from all we know now. What were we always talking about? Who's going to bring in this Sunday law?
The Pope?
Pope or papacy, right? So everybody's given the third angel. And as Logina pointed out, what makes it different is time, right? What this movement has is time. Making it separate from what Adventism is teaching is time. So what happens in this dispensation? What do we know this waymark to be?
Time of the end.
Time of the end. So we understand, according to Daniel 11:40, that we're at the time of the end, which in itself is saying we know time. So what did Adventism reject when they were given the time of the end magazine?
Time.
We don't know the time. Okay. So I'll just, in this place, I'll read what he says. The reason we do line upon line is to calculate time. We can calculate time in two ways. We can say we've got 5 minutes, which is very specific, or we can say we're nearly there. So what's the difference between 5 minutes and nearly there? With a scale of 10 years or 5 minutes, and I said we're nearly there, which one would you go for?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Which would be specific. So the idea of nearly there means we're very close. We're in the time of the end now. So we're the end of the planet. So we put this up here. I'm looking at the priest line, but we want to focus on this one. time of the end. We now know that we're at the time of the end of the planet. When we first began, we would just say we're nearly there. In this history here, we're nearly there because we didn't know the exact time. Now we actually talk about the time, 2 years, 2 months, and we actually give periods and dates. We have all these dates on the board. So we're tracking time. And up here, we're tracking time. And have been able to work out dates along the way. So to clarify what distinguishes the two seeds, here and here, is the present truth message. And the present, currently, present now, is the end of the world. The truth is the third angel's message, or what Ellen White would call the message to Laodicea. It's part of the, it's the part that is the preparation bit before Sunday Law. It's this one that puts you in either the good seed or the bad seed. So this message here of the third angel is going to put you either in the good seed or the bad seed. So now I think we want to, so when we get to our generation, everyone is saying that they love the third angel. We're in Adventism, pre being in this movement, and we love the third angel. And I always remember back before Christine came to the Sac Central, early on when they wanted to stop me from sharing DVDs with people, and I always remember the pastor saying, after all, Elaine, our job is to give the third angel's message. And I walked out of there literally scratching my head, but what is the third angel's message? They all talk about it. We're giving the third angel, we're giving the third angel, but did anybody else along with me think, well, what is it? Or is it just me? I don't think that it's just me. I think we all must have wondered that because we're here.
I did too. I was just like you. It was so nebulous.
Yes.
Trying
nebulous.
to,
Nebulous. I guess they would say the Sabbath in the papacy. Their idea, the message to the Laodiceans is don't take the mark of the beast. So simple and nebulous. So everyone is saying they love the third angel. What distinguishes the two is the subject of the nearness of the end, which we call time, which we've looked at now. So we have time now. And we're now marking time. So when you get to the 1888 period, they're also having a fight over the present truth message, the third angel's message. What is the focus of the 1888 history?
That was slavery.
1888. 1888. Jones and Wagner.
Oh, 1888. Yeah.
Sunday Law.
No. Jones and Wagner. What were they given? What message were Jones and Wagner?
Righteousness by faith.
Righteousness by faith, right? So they're giving this message called the third angel's message, and it's righteousness by faith. And so let's say we're back in that history and we're good Adventists, and these guys are coming along and saying that these two are coming along and saying that the third angel's message is righteousness by faith. What is Adventism saying? About Jones and Wagner. Not talking about Ellen White. What is Adventism saying?
well, they kind of thought they were crackpots, right?
Yeah, why? Why? What to the Adventists, what was the third angel's message?
Well, the literal third angel's message. They didn't understand the relationship of righteousness by faith to the third angel's message.
Or they were not preaching the present truth at that time.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
So when they're arguing that the third angel is righteousness by faith, and the other ones are arguing, no, it's not, what is the other side saying that the third angel is?
Righteousness by works?
No. We'll go back to 1846, I guess, because we're going to get to the 1846 a little bit too. that the Sunday law will come from the Protestant America but we see that they don't follow the truth anymore. Yes, so Adventism, what's the big, we already kind of said it, what's the big thing that we're looking at in Adventism back prehistory? What are we looking at? What are we saying the Sabbath, that the third angel is all about? And somebody said Sunday law. Yes, the Sabbath. Thank you. It's the Sabbath, Anna. So the Sabbath. So Sunday law is not a wrong answer. We just want to look at what are they claiming? What's their big, the big thing that they stake everything on, and that's the Sabbath. So you have in 1888 history, Jones and Wagner giving this message and calling it the third angel's message. And they have an argument, right? And they go to, okay, so we'll ask this question first. So if you go back to the early part of Ellen White's history, you go back to the early part of Ellen White's history and the defining issue, which we just said, Anna just said, the defining issue is the Sabbath. I just want to ask it the way he asked it so we can stay on track here. So the defining issue is the Sabbath. And Ellen White, is she part of the church? (1844). Is Ellen White part of the church? Yes. Is Ellen White good or bad?
Good.
You sure? Bad. Why is she bad? Is she keeping the Sabbath?
Oh, not back then, no.
So she's bad, right? And she has to move from the bad to the good, right? Okay, so she's keeping Sunday, so she's bad, and she's going to change, and it's about the Sabbath issue. So then you go to the 1888 period, and it's justification by faith. And what is justification by faith according to Ellen White? What does Ellen White say justification? I think we all know that. Most of us know this quote. What is justification by faith? When they go to Ellen White and they question it, is it the third angel's message? Is righteousness by faith or justification by faith? Is it the third angel? What does she say?
It's the third angel's message in verity.
In verity. First selected messages, 372, paragraph 2. And it's 1890, 2 years after 1888, when they go and they cry out to her. And they say that these people are destroying, Jones and Wagner, they're destroying the present truth message, which is the third angel, which is the Sabbath. They're destroying it, and they're distracting people from the truth, which is the Sabbath. The third angel's message, which looks like the Sabbath. So they have 40 years of keeping the Sabbath. And then here comes Jones and Wagner destroying the message, saying that the third angel is righteousness by faith. And so they go to Ellen White and they ask her, and she gives them. Several have written to me. They ask if the message of justification by faith is the third angel's message. And I said, yes, it's the third angel's message in truth. It says in verity, which is truthfulness. And this comment came, I think it was from Tamina, that it almost seems like the truth is fighting against the truth. So if you're witnessing this, we understand it, we see it and understand it, I believe, now. But if you're this Adventist that's watching this, it looks like the truth is fighting against the truth. And so it makes it for a real stumbling block for people. So that was the 1888 history, where you have the truth of the third angel, righteousness by faith, that is fighting against the truth, the Sabbath, in the earlier history. And seeing that battle makes for a stumbling block. So imagine 100 years later, what does it look like when we're saying the third angel's message is time? Is related to time. as an Adventist, are you not set up to fail? What did your prophet tell you? What did the prophet tell us about the message of time?
Time is no longer.
Yeah. And Christine, it's one select messages, 372, paragraph 2, if that's the one you're asking for.
Please repeat.
One selected messages, 372.2.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, so you're trying to tell Adventists that it's time. We're at the time of the end. How can you be at the time of the end? How can you know you're at the time of the end? Because there's no such thing as time. There will never be another message on time. Time is the truth, and it's fighting against the Sabbath or the previous history. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see if we follow the rest of this part so we can finish our, where are we at on time? Oh, wow. I know. We might, if anybody wants to keep going, we can now. We got a little ways to go. I don't want to cut this off in the middle of this, though. How does everybody feel about trying to work through the rest of this? I didn't realize what time it is. You want to keep going or pause and pick it up next week? 20, 30 minutes.
20, 30 minutes left to kind of tie this into a bow.
While it's fresh in our minds, I leave it up to everybody else.
I'm open.
Are there any that are nay would like to break when we carry this next week? It's actually okay if we carry it next week because we'll review again and get to where we left off. And that'll only solidify things. So I'm open either way.
Next week?
I would need a break, I think, for me.
I need a
My
break
mind is
too.
beginning to lose a lot of stuff, and I don't want to do that.
Okay.
I'm like Jackie. My brain's kind of tired, but it's been an awesome study.
Yes, it has.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to rush through this.
Okay, Christine, sorry.
No, it's an important topic, so I'm glad we're not rushing. Thank you.
Well, the part of me wants to not leave off at this point, but the other part of me, if we do come back, we'll review again and it'll only solidify it more. And I was thinking
Exactly.
that, as you said that, because I was inclined to go with Christine. And but we'll just review it again, which will only solidify it that much more as we finish it.
Absolutely. Yes.
And you'll take a picture of the board for us?
I will take a picture of the board as it is right now.
Thank you.
And that'll help us because we want to see where this takes us to help us to understand what we're already understanding about Matthew just from another way.
Yes.
Okay. So do we have somebody to close in prayer? Jackie, would you like to close us in prayer?
Yes, I can do that. A blessed study, for sure. Our dear God in heaven, we thank you for this study that we need so badly to understand Matthew 13 and all of the aspects with the right parable methodology. We know it's very important for us to be able to see these events from the past and where we are now, heading into the agitation of the Sunday law that is going on even now, to prepare us that we may be ready in all of the understanding that we need only by your Holy Spirit impressing our minds with this truth. There's so much to it. So we pray that we can be better prepared even next week as we come back with this and do this review. And we thank you for the study that we have had today and how you're leading each one of us individually but yet we work together as one, as a body, in helping one another to understand. But we know we need your Holy Spirit more than anything else to have the right, the correct understanding. So bless each one of us. I pray as we separate today, this afternoon, that we will be blessed in the afternoon hours of the Sabbath. We thank you that your hand is over us all, as well as your people where they are gathered today throughout the world. We thank you for the light that was given to Elder Parmender and how it is so needed now in this time. So be with us, I pray, until we meet again next week. And we thank you for all your blessings of light, truth, mercy, patience, and your wisdom that you continue to give us. We thank you for everything that you have given us at this time, that we can live in relative peace with the world the way it is, and things getting worse and worse, and so many suffering. We thank you, God, for hearing our prayers and for answering our prayers according to your will. And we pray all of these things in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Jackie.